All right, June 8th, Austin. We made it after what it feels like is a long break that we took, but for all good reasons. So we are in a new office. So that was what was going on. I was moving from an old office to a new office. My daughter ended up breaking her elbow, and so she had to get surgery. And then I had like 2 trips to New York. And so May was just a crazy month. How have you been?
I mean, similarly crazy. I was in California for a bit. I've been training for this Ironman. I have the first part of the race next weekend. And travel and training is hard. I'm sure you feel it with all this stuff going on. I'm eager to hear about your training schedule and if you kept up.
Oh my God. Okay, wait. So training took a really interesting turn. I've been steadily climbing up. So I'm like doing like 5-mile runs now pretty consistently on the weekends.
Love it.
And feeling really good about it, right? Like not feeling completely gassed at the end of it. So I feel like I can keep going. But at the beginning of May, I started noticing as I was ramping up that I had these severe allergies. I'd never spent this much time outside running and breathing in the California air. And so I had to go to the doc and get some like proper allergy medication. Never happened in my life. So this was like the other side reason for just the last few weeks being crazy. But other than the allergies, I'm feeling great.
Never had allergies in California. Got decimated when I came to the East Coast though.
It's fascinating. It's like whatever your body's used to. And I was talking to my co-founder and he was like, yeah, you just turned 40 last year. And he had something similar happen to him when he turned 40. So it might also be age related, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That is weird. And also like, I don't know if you've known about this, but you can like apparently acclimate your body to allergies by taking effectively small samples of them. Like that's what allergy shots are, is it's like giving you the thing that normally invokes a response in microdoses so that your body builds immunity to it over time, which is wild to me. It's so cool what the human body is capable of. Like I'm gonna
for more medical advice, keep listening to GTMN.FM, right? Like oh my God. There's actually some really interesting stuff happening in the medical industry, which is not what we talk about here, but we'll cover that maybe another time. We also decided to take a little bit of a break over the last few weeks as we were thinking about what else we want to cover on this show. And we had a couple of ideas over this last weekend. So I don't know, maybe we'll talk about it. So one thing that I was getting excited about is in addition to all the news that we cover, we maybe should start talking about the go-to-market of specific brands and breaking it down and kind of doing a live case study. I feel like that would be really interesting for, all types of brands, consumer brands and, SaaS brands and fintech brands, and kind of go deep on every go-to-market tactic that they deploy. So that's one thing that's going to be coming up. I'm excited about that. And the other is interviews with operators and founders in the go-to-market space. So that could also be really interesting. And so we've got a couple of interesting folks lined up for that. And I'm excited about getting into those. But yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think I'm excited too. I feel like, so in the background of everything that was happening in May, I also took a break from like LinkedIn. And I think the underlying thought process has been, as AI has changed the world, I feel like it's kind of taken over the consciousness of everybody. And even in our show, I feel like we were talking about it a lot, which is great. But also like there's a lot more to talk about. And I think you and I both felt this way when we came back together on the show, is just like, what can we find other interesting topics to cover? Can we talk about marketing from a more thorough lens? Can we dive deeper into the stories of marketing and go-to-market? Because I don't think AI is going anywhere, and it's certainly interesting and fascinating, but it's starting to feel more and more like a bubble. Maybe not a bubble in the financial sense, but certainly like a bubble in terms of the echo chamber that's happening. And yeah, like we're both building with AI. We don't need to talk about it every single week. I'm sure we'll sprinkle in thoughts and feelings as they come up. But I think I'm very anchored now in this idea of finding purpose on other things. And yeah, I don't know. My reflection on LinkedIn in particular has been, it's just this incessant storm of people talking about the same things and creating this almost irrational FOMO.
Yeah.
So it felt really good to disconnect from that last month. And I am rethinking my own social strategy. And I'm sure you're doing for like, for Paramark and for yourself. These channels used to be such, great vehicles for getting your voice out there. But just like with Instagram and Facebook before it, there's like been this inflection point where I'm like, I think this is doing like less for my mental health than good. So let's just rein it back in a bit,
I couldn't agree more, and I feel the overwhelm for sure. And I was looking at, my own social media habits. I only post on LinkedIn, maybe a little bit on X these days, but like not much. And you're right, the echo chamber is very real and it's draining. So we have a bunch of news to cover up, to catch up today from the last like month. So this will probably be sort of like, we'll do one news show, we'll do one interview show, we'll do one sort of deep dive on a specific, company's go to market, and then we'll rinse and repeat. So we're not talking about the news, but it's just going to be a different type of show going forward. So if you're listening and you want to keep listening with the new sort of format, double down, and if you're not, more than happy to have you off the list. Okay, let's dive in for the last couple of weeks and what's been happening. I feel like the biggest thing that happened, Austin, was the Google Marketing Live event. Do you know what this is? Like, this is like they've started something doing this like maybe a few years ago, where they have a Google Marketing Live and then they have Google I/O. Google I/O is like all of their launches, and Marketing Live is like their marketing focused launches and advertising related launches. And so they announced a couple of really interesting things in this year's Google Marketing Live. And the biggest sort of shift is they are talking about completely revamping their search experience. I don't know if you caught up with this, but like the idea is that when you go on google.com and you look at the search box, it's going to be completely transformed. And what that means is no more blue links. They're actually going to let AI mode basically be the default way that Google search works going forward. And this is obviously they launched the AI mode last year, and they did a bunch of like tactical things, and they're keeping their 1 foot in each boat, as the analogy goes, between search and AI mode. But this year they basically announced over the next few months they're going to go completely default on AI mode, and everything that you see on google.com is going to be default AI native. And this is a direct response to what's happening with ChatGPT and Claude and all of that fun stuff. So that was like one big announcement, and there were a bunch of related things to that, but it's really refreshing to see an incumbent be ready to completely disrupt themselves. Like it doesn't happen often. And it's, they've executed it, at least like from the outside in, like really, really well. So I'm intrigued to see how that pans out.
Yeah. Well, and then related to this, I heard the news about them doing this. I didn't know all the details that you shared, but they also had a big change to their algorithm, I think in May. And that actually has been impacting a lot of marketers on the other side of the table, because there's the experience you have searching, but then there's what it is surfacing from a search perspective. And I don't even think this is totally AI related, but there's kind of like two worlds emerging between the folks who I think are really benefiting from the changes that are coming out of Google's algorithm change, and the folks who are not. And I was curious if you had talked to any SEO experts and what their thoughts were and how people are navigating those changes.
Yeah, what's interesting is, I've been following the SEO AEO sort of divide quite a bit, and I was talking to this head of performance marketing at this travel company in Europe. And if you know anything about travel, they are very heavily dependent on Google search, right? Because you can think about the travel industry as like, I'm booking a flight or I'm booking tickets for a specific, tourist destination. That is the prime moment to capture them into whatever you're selling for that, itinerary. And so they were very, like the 90% of their spend was Google search. And they are feeling the pain because those searches are changing dramatically. Now, on the other hand, there are brands that are only doing about 10 or 20% of their spend on Google search, and they're not that impacted, which makes a ton of sense, right? Because you weren't addicted to that bottom of funnel. So I think it is very industry and vertical specific. Travel is definitely seeing lots of impact. Consumer products, not as much. But the more commoditized you are as a category, the more impacted you will be. And, so it really depends on, like, if you're very SEO dependent, then I think you have a really sort of tough life going forward. If you are only partially SEO dependent, then I think, your life is going to be a lot more defensible for the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing earth shattering in that statement, but like, it's not one or the other. And, I would say if you're a brand right now and you're growing up, like just remember to diversify from the very beginning. Don't be overly reliant on like one channel because these types of shifts will continue to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. Like the only strategy here is diversifying your bets so that you're not caught in one corner. And yeah, I think like there's still just not enough information yet about what's working and not working. Although increasingly, I do find that some of the people that I've seen performing quite well on SEO and I guess what's now called AEO are somewhat taking like a back to the roots approach of, well, the thing that you can't scale is human writing. So you can build the system, machine, and automation around coming up with ideas and drafting. But ultimately, if you try to take that all the way through to the post, you kind of fail because it's pretty easy to detect fully AI generated content. So yeah, it's been interesting talking to companies that are in the spectrum of fully autonomous content gen for SEO and AEO purposes and companies that are not on that side of the spectrum. And yeah, and then it's also just interesting to talk about the concept of AEO and SEO and how are they the same term now? Kind of. I guess like probably the founders of some of these different tooling companies would disagree, but increasingly it's all the same. It's just whether it's autonomous or not,
It's interesting. Like, I think some people describe the tactics that you would employ for SEO and AEO to be the same, but the mechanisms through which the platforms operate and rank and cite to be very different.
Yep.
And that's where I think the cognitive dissonance is, because if you go and talk to a vendor that talks about how to rank in ChatGPT or AI mode, they'll give you a bunch of things to do, and it's like a very specific, this is why you buy, an Aerops or a Profound or whatever have you, and then you go look at Ahrefs and SEMrush, and they'll talk about it from an SEO perspective, even though they're starting to get into geo stuff as well. And again, the tactics are the same, but they're just promising different outcomes. And what's unclear to me is if there will be a divergence between the two or if there will be a convergence between the two. And I don't know. Like, I don't think I have a good sense of like what's going to happen. Like, there was this whole conversation on both LinkedIn and X about the person who leads SEO at Google, and they were talking about the concept of LLMs.txt. Have you heard of this?
Yeah.
And there was like, why do you, like, Google has LLMs.txt for certain properties. And so the outside world is like, well, if you're saying that SEO and geo is the same, then why do you have LLMs.txt? And his point was the job to be done with LLMs.txt is more about how to use the content on the website rather than how to get discovered in search or in answer engines. That's a really important distinction. So it's more about usability of the platform rather than discoverability. And then you're now talking about sort of agentic actions on the website rather than, discoverability. So I don't know. There's it's still very early days, I have to say.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that all these AI providers continue to use Google as the primary source of truth for search. I mean, we know that OpenAI is not. They're building their own index. So I think part of the reason why they're valued so highly is because there's some speculation that in the process of offering, GPT, they're going to build their own search, ability as well. And search in GPT right now is very much guided by data freshness. So it's always looking at the freshest piece of content, not necessarily the most relevant. So I think there's like more potential on GPT right now to kind of like growth hack your way to success, right? In the same way that like you used to be able to figure out SEO was just a game and you could kind of check the boxes around your H1s and your references and canonical URLs and all the other parts that go into an SEO optimization score. And you could kind of like gamify SEO in a way. I think the gamification of SEO has gotten much harder. And so there's just this question in my mind of like, how long do all these other providers continue to use Google as the primary source for search, or do they try to build their own search platforms to feed the responses to humans?
There is a company called Parallel.AI. This was founded by the ex-CEO of Twitter, the guy who was the CEO when Musk took over. And they've raised a ton of funding, and essentially what they're trying to build is a, alternative to basically the monopoly that Google has on indexing the whole internet. And so they're basically running, a search API, an extract API, and then a whole bunch of APIs for web agents so that if you are trying to sort of, I'm assuming that they sell this stuff to the OpenAIs and the Anthropics of the world, but also like any other SaaS developer or AI developer that's trying to do things based on, indexing the internet and not just be, reliant on Google's sort of searching. So I think it's also unclear to me whether, how big that whole sort of ecosystem is going to get. But, a couple of other things like coming back on Google Marketing Live that they talked about, which was interesting to me. One was this conversational discovery ad. So this is essentially, this is a new ad format in AI mode. And whenever you have a search query in AI mode, that Gemini will basically write an explainer paired with that query and feature your ad in that conversation. So it's kind of similar to what ChatGPT ads is trying to do, but like more in line, which is interesting. And then the other one is highlighted answers. And so think about like if you're searching in AI mode and you get a whole like long text, there's a piece of the thing which is highlighted and that is, an ad. Again, both great sort of user experiences. Some of them are paid, some of them are organic, and you're kind of highlighting and saying it's sponsored. I think customers are gonna be fine with it, and it's a very nice evolution of what Google Search has been doing. So that was one sort of big sort of ad format. The second one that was really interesting was a custom AI agent inside an ad that lets a user ask questions of the advertiser's website without leaving the ad surface. And then submitting pre-filled lead forms. So this is like a lead gen ad, but also like a chatbot within the ad, which is kind of wild. So you never have to go to the website. You're just doing everything from AI mode. Again, like...
It reminds me of those games, the games ads where you can like play the game in the ad without ever leaving the ad. It's the same thing, but for B2B SaaS. Like you can almost see the demo and try the product in the ad and then submit the form, which is fascinating.
Yeah. And then, okay, so this is all like on the advertising side. They also announced the concept of a universal cart. This is probably the most ambitious thing that they are launching, but imagine a universal cart across Search, Gemini, YouTube, Gmail, Discover, like all of the Google surfaces where you can add something to your cart from anywhere. And then it gives you a bunch of helpful information. Like it tells you if the price has gone down or up, or if it's trending up or down. So, giving you alerts. Second is telling you if it's available in store in a location that's near you. And then essentially it's basically a giant wish list, right? So you keep adding to your universal cart and then you just like hit one button and you pay with Google Pay and it just does the whole thing. So it's kind of like taking on Amazon, right? Obviously the logistics is not going to work because they don't have a logistics arm, but a universal checkout outside of Amazon makes a ton of sense in an interesting way. So yeah, I thought all of these were really interesting announcements. I'm excited to see how this plays out, but Google is really crushing it with their go-to-market right now.
Yeah, the universal checkout is an interesting idea. I feel like this has been tried before. And for what it's worth, I almost feel like Shop Pay is closer to a universal checkout than anybody ever will be. And I'm surprised that hasn't become a fuller experience. I don't know if you've ever logged in at Shop Pay. It's just like kind of like a profile settings for your credit card. But so many merchants use it. And there's so many items that like kind of encapsulate the patchwork of my life, like, the running shoes you buy and that shirt that you love that you bought 2 years ago and the common things that you get from Marine Layer or whatever, like all this stuff runs on Shop. And if it doesn't, they could probably integrate it with like the major brands, So
I agree.
I almost feel like there's need for an experience that kind of emulates the Whole Foods kind of checkout. If you're checking out on Amazon at the very end of the checkout process, they'd be like, "Oh, well, do you want some groceries too?" And sometimes it's really annoying, but a lot of times it's actually really helpful because you're like, "Well, I might as well just get my groceries delivered since I'm checking out on Amazon." And I kind of think about the same experience for everything else, especially if they have insights into knowing like what's on your calendar and are you traveling? And, like they just have a lot more data, Google does, about your life than anybody else. But we can only dream, I guess.
Indeed. Okay, so I want to talk about maybe pivoting to this LinkedIn post that I saw. I'm sure you've been asked this question a lot, right? What is the future of the marketing org? And so this is related to this. It's talking about so the SVP of strategy at Salesforce had this post like 2 weeks ago where he talked about, in 2026, the marketing organization typically looks like you've got a head of brand, you've got a head of digital, you've got a head of, e-com if you're a consumer company, and then you have a head of data and analytics. And then you've got like individual teams within, each of these sort of silos that work together and try to execute your marketing strategy. And he's talking about sort of what does this look like in 2030? And the picture that he paints is, okay, so now you have a CMO. He claims that CMOs don't go away. But then you have two sort of parallel orgs. One is a brand and strategy team, and the other is a data and AI science team. And putting them on equal footing. And the brand and strategy team is responsible for guardrails, identity, so on and so forth. And the data and the AI science team is responsible for what they call model governance, which kind of makes sense to me. And then you have a layer below that, which is agent orchestrators, audience intelligence, and compliance and risk. And then you have an execution layer, which is all agentic, audience first, not channel first, and agents choose the touch points, not teams. So, how do you, like, all the campaign structure, the content, the personalization, the analytics are all happening at this like agentic layer. This was actually one of the more compelling, future sort of waypoints that I've seen. But I'm curious what you think about it.
I mean, it resonates with maybe like a version of the world that I've been thinking about, which is that for a long time, we've been moving this direction of marketing teams becoming technical and non-technical as the divide, with non-technical consisting of brand and product marketing and design and all the things that require human creativity to be good and great. All the things that we say now require taste. And then there's data analytics, engineering, automation, all the things that require more of your right side of your brain, how to automate a task, how to use data to guide something like a performance marketing ad, how to optimize your CAC, the side of marketing that is frankly far more technical, nuanced, and engineering driven. And I think like that to me has always been the framing of marketing. And when I talk to teams, like founders especially, I think they often like don't delineate between those types of departments and also what they need at what size and stage in the company. Because I think over time, especially if we're just talking in startup land, as you approach a Series C, D, or E company, you tend to have both of these things. And if you want to be successful, particularly in B2B, I think you do need to have both these things. So the question is just like, what's most important for you at the inception of your company? And how do you build the team up over time? Do you start by having a more tactical, growth-oriented engineering team with like not as much creativity or vice versa? But yeah, and in particular, like the one area that stands out to me is that there's this, I think, growing movement around the idea of an operator or an engineer. Like we talked about this before, the idea of like the Clay go-to-market engineer, and now Profound kind of is trying to wrap people around this idea of the marketing engineer. I think the real challenge, though, is that within that technical layer of individuals, there are actual engineers who know how to write code. And I think there are pseudo-technical folks who are scrappy, almost like a growth hacker. They're technical in nature. They know how to use data. They can read APIs. Maybe they have some self-taught programming skills, but they're not true engineers. And that is a spectrum from like the lightest of being technical to the deepest of being technical. And I think sometimes people don't break that down into layers in the technical department of marketing. And I worry about what's going to happen over time when you effectively have teams that have a designer and perhaps a creative person and a brand marketer, and then one of the lightest versions of a go-to-market engineer or marketing engineer. And are they really equipped to, like, for example, do the marketing of Ramp? And the answer is no. And, so what I often come back to is I think like if you're trying to, engineer your way to success on go-to-market, then you should actually still hire real engineers. And I don't think AI really changes any of this. AI just allows you to do more with less and allows you to move faster. But like a very good example is like I talked to a team about a month ago where they had like one marketer who has a bunch of Claude workflows that she's running, and she's promoting those to routines, and she has skills. So she's doing a lot with AI, and she's getting a lot of value for her worth, but she's spread across like so many surface areas. And so the problem is like, one, she's not really able to do more in marketing because she's spread so thin. And because she's spread so thin, she also represents a pretty big liability to the firm. Like if any of her stuff breaks, all of marketing breaks, right? So I think this is some of maybe the dilemma that's coming up in marketing teams is that, yes, there's a divide between technical and non-technical, but within those, there's kind of different levels or layers of how much you can automate versus what needs to be human. And then on the technical side, there's like layers of who's actually building automations in like a prod grade setting and who's just kind of using off-the-shelf tools to hack their way to success, which again, there's no problem with that as long as it's aligned to kind of the company size, stage, and kind of their vision for what they want to be, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And that feeling of like spread thin, I definitely feel that as well. Like we're a very lean team and we're trying to do a lot with, obviously sort of as much as human content and then, leveraging AI for automation and routines and what have you.
Mhm.
But if you don't have somebody thinking about it 100% of their time, right? It's easy to just get lost in the minutia and not be like strategic and seeing sort of the full system and then executing like strategically. And so I definitely feel that pain. Okay, couple of other things before we wrap for this week. There was an interesting report from the Technical University of Munich, and this was highlighted by Eric Seufert. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Yeah.
Seufert. So this is a report from Technical University of Munich, Columbia Business School, Harvard Business School that analyzed more than 16 billion ad impressions and 116 million clicks from, of all places, Taboola. So don't judge, but Taboola, that's fine. Lots of data. And in this like quasi experiment, they compared the performance of AI generated and human generated sibling ads. They defined these sibling ads as ads from the same campaigns for the same products, but and with the same launch dates, but some are AI generated, some are human generated. Couple of really interesting findings from this. One is the click-through rate performance for AI-generated ads and from human-generated ads, statistically indistinguishable. Now, it's controlling for certain campaign-level factors, but still
Crazy.
statistically indistinguishable. And here's another really interesting finding. They reached a conclusion that ads that look AI-generated perform worse. Okay, so what's going on, right? So if AI ads and human-generated ads are indistinguishable from a CTR perspective, but the ads that look AI-generated perform worse, you probably can guess where I'm going with this. What they realize is that even the human-generated ads, many of them looked like they were AI-generated.
Oh, God.
Yep. So it's the perception, not the reality, right? And what they're effectively saying in this is that, and I've actually said this for quite a while, that AI slop or slop in general has always existed, and AI is just making it easier to create that slop. But like, it's not a new phenomenon. And this study is basically saying the same thing, that things that look AI generated perform worse, but it's not always the AI generation that makes them look like AI generated. So there's certain sort of visual traits that human beings just put in the bucket of like crappy ads.
Mhm.
And yeah, so a couple of really interesting, learnings here. And it comes back to that point that you need a human in the loop with good judgment and good taste to tell both the human generated ads and the AI generated ads which ones are above the threshold and are going to get received, well by their audience, and what is going to be treated as crap. And so that human in the loop is still very, very important. So yeah, that was a really interesting study.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It kind of reminds me of a similar story that I was reading about in the last week, which is, branding and human perception of content. And, this happened early on, people realizing what AI written content looks like and basically kind of protesting against it, the M dash as an example. But now we've gone back in another direction and I think writers are starting to intentionally inject mistakes into their writing so that the signaling effect of it being human written. But I don't think that lasts for forever. I just suspect that these models get better and better with each passing year to the point where like the AI can do probably what a human can do just as fine as long as you can prompt it. And this to me is what's really sticking is like there's really no substitution in any of this for deep, thoughtful, intellectual planning work. A great example. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about what we were doing for the last month. One of the things I've been doing is talking to a lot of founders and a lot of operators. founders are really focused on, hey, how do I enable my teams to be more successful? Operators are often like, okay, how do I use these tools to keep my job? And across the board, I think there's an acceptance of using tools, especially in marketing, to get the work done. But you really can't teach people to think critically and transpose that onto some type of medium that the AI can read. And like I'm starting to understand a little bit of the hype around neural implants, because it is sometimes hard to get the intention and the words out of somebody when it's just thoughts, right? Like I was working with a team the other day to like talk through this big strategy plan. And it all came down to like, how well did they read things, synthesize things, and communicate them? And guess what? That is often what allows AI to perform really well or not. And so, I think where my head goes with all this stuff is, the perception of AI is certainly like part of the problem right now. But I still just think like, especially for ad planning and marketing, like there is just no good substitution for using your brain right now.
Agreed. I can get behind that thought. Okay, couple of things before we wrap this up. So one is Amazon. Okay, this is wild. The trailing 12-month ad revenue for Amazon is $70 billion.
Wow.
This is larger than the entire AWS business was in 2018. So Amazon ads, $70 billion. That's 1/4 of Google and Meta, which is kind of wild to me. Like I never put Amazon in that bucket of like, it's 25% of Meta and Google's size, but it's massive. And apparently they're doing a really good job on the DSP side, which is, essentially using their data to drive advertising and like video ad platforms, like not just Prime Video, but like other streaming TV and CTV and all that fun stuff. Sure. So that was one really interesting number. The other one was Publicis, which is a leading agency, buying LiveRamp for $2.2 billion, which is fascinating. So I don't know if this would be considered a good exit for LiveRamp. Like they've been at it for a while. At least it's an exit. And they were maybe already a public company, right? I forget.
Yeah, they were. And they, ironically, they're now getting rid of the stock ticker Ramp. So I wonder who.
So some good news for the Ramp team.
Yeah. Sure, they're going to try to get that new stock ticker.
Yeah, so they bought so Publicis, which is an agency, one of the big four. I think it's the biggest agency in the world. They bought Epsilon for $4.4 billion in 2019. They bought Latam for I don't know how much in 2025. Now LiveRamp. So lots of data type of acquisitions. And I think the emphasis here is like, hey, for you to survive as an agency, you need some unique proprietary stuff, and that's what LiveRamp gives to Publicis, and they can sell that to their end clients and be like, hey, it's not just Google and Meta that have all this data. We've got a whole bunch of data through LiveRamp, and that's unique and that's proprietary. But then what happens to all the other ad agencies that were doing the same thing with LiveRamp? So it's an interesting, maybe there'll be a new alternative for LiveRamp that comes alive now that it's not independent. So interesting acquisition. And then the last piece on the M&A front that was fun is there was an IPO that nobody's talking about, June 5th, 2026, Liftoff Mobile. So this is similar to AppLovin, I think. They are a programmatic mobile app marketing, Liftoff Mobile. They raised $437 million and they're worth like $4.5 billion in the public markets. Surprisingly, the stock hasn't tanked yet. Usually, like in the last couple of years, whenever you have an IPO, it just goes straight down, right? We've all seen the stories. But they're at least like the first 5 or 6 days in. Well, I guess maybe even just like 2 days in, because this happened on June 5th. So just Friday, they're still sort of maintaining their valuation. So yeah, some good news for AdTech and MarTech and that whole industry.
Yeah, AdTech, MarTech is historically just beat up in the long run. So I think the real question will be how it fares over the next 360, 700 days. But historically, MarTech has not been a great space for investors.
Yeah. We shall see. All right, that was it for the docket for this week. Austin, anything else that you want to talk about? What are you reading? What are you exploring these days in your own time?
Actually, so this is funny, not at all to get political. I am reading, just in celebration of the 250th anniversary of this great country, I'm reading 1776 by David McCullough, which is like a real great throwback if you haven't read it. I think the last time I read it, I was probably in 7th or 8th grade. It's one of his best works on the year which the country fought the Revolutionary War, which is great because it puts things in perspective whenever you feel ennui about our current state of affairs. You can remember that at least you don't have dysentery.
Well said. Well said.
What are you? What are you reading besides AI news?
Honestly, it's been such a busy time for me that I haven't really carved out enough time for reading. I listen to a lot of David Goggins while running, and that's been really re-energizing for me. So I honestly haven't been reading much outside of like what's happening at work. One paper that I read, so it's all just marketing stuff, which I should not talk about more of. But I am I'm looking forward to, actually, I was thinking about creating this project for myself. I'm going to look at all the ancient texts. I was thinking about this on my drive into work today. So Stoicism, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Bible, Islam, like all of the religious and ancient texts, and take out all the lessons about mental strength from all of them and put them in like one little notebook for myself, so that's a side project that I'm going to kick off with Claude Code, and see if I can just publish it for myself, and if people find it helpful and interesting, maybe put it online for other people to print out. So that's aspirationally what I will be reading in the next like couple of weeks.
That reminds me, this is like maybe a interesting challenge for us later if we feel like diverging from marketing, but there's this concept of supertexts. I had a mentor that told me like he would basically never read the news every day because his thought was, if you don't read the news, then you don't know what's happening, which means you always have a conversation with everybody else who has. So strategically not reading news as a way of engaging with other people. So then the question was, well, what do you spend your time reading? And he said, I spend all my time reading supertexts, which are texts that have withstood more than 400 years. And there's there are a lot of supertexts, but like that are still popular, well-read, and important to, life. And so it's like Plato's Republic, it's like Shakespeare, Don Quixote, the Iliad, Odyssey, all that type of stuff. And if you think about it, like, I think I read those things in high school a long time ago, but I certainly haven't revisited them. And my perspective as an adult is totally different than when I was 16-year-olds reading this stuff and thinking like, oh, okay. And yeah, I mean, some of like the lessons that you read in books when you're 16 don't make any sense because you don't have any experience, and you haven't experienced tragedy, and you haven't experienced hardship and like love and all these other things that are important to the human experience. So it's been making me think a little bit more recently about, all right, do I do a supertext dive this summer and try to go through some of them, especially in the framing of what we've lightly hinted at the start of this conversation, which is like this search for purpose. In the background of this news channel, I think we talk a lot about AI and marketing, and then we also talk about a lot of the fact that like, what is AI going to do to people's sense of purpose? And so I don't know, maybe connecting with things that are meaningful and important in the written world is like a great way to re-encounter purpose. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. We got to touch on this subject. I completely forgot, but Anthropic filed for an IPO, which is...
So did SpaceX.
So and there's rumors that OpenAI is about to. And I was having this conversation with an early, somebody who wrote an angel check in our company like 3 years ago. And we were debating whether the $1 trillion valuation is realistic for Anthropic. And I was a little bit like bearish on that valuation, and he was a little bit bullish on it. And I came away convinced that maybe he's right and I'm wrong. And the reasoning that I bought into is they are going to be doing $100 billion in revenue this year. If they're doing $100 billion in revenue this year, a 10x multiple on revenue is very standard. And it also sounds like they're on the path to profitability. And so if you're a $100 billion company on the path to profitability, a 10x multiple is very reasonable, and a $1 trillion valuation is very reasonable. Very simple analysis. But yeah, so it's kind of crazy. Like AI is definitely changing a lot of things, but I think the winners are going to be very concentrated. It's not going to be uniformly, impacting every business. But yeah, so it's going to be an interesting second half of this year.
Yeah. So I had an opportunity to invest in Anthropic maybe a year.
Ooh.
And at the time, I had trouble believing that they could grow to fulfill the revenue goals that they've now achieved. And for what it's worth, if you're looking at Anthropic in April of 2025, it's a very different story than looking at it in January of 2026.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, this is the reason why I think like a lot of the best investors are insane optimists, because they can see the future in a way that pragmatists, probably like you and me, can't. Also, it's easier to invest in things when you have money. And if you don't have money, it's harder to take big bets that will pay off. That's why some of the best investors come from money, because they can take more bets. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think between these IPOs and SpaceX, there's a real chance that the market continues to boom, and maybe the idea that we outgrow our problems in the US, because of debt rising, like where there's a real chance that our growth in GDP far outseeds our borrowing, and we kind of grow our way out of the problems of the US. There's also a real chance that this all, balloons out of control and spirals, and we're in a lot of trouble. But like I just said, I think it's better to be an optimist if you want to make money.
Indeed. Yeah, I have you seen I saw the chart over the weekend, which was like the percentage of the US government's budget that is going towards debt repayments.
Yeah.
And it's just going like a hockey stick. Like that's what you want to see on a venture-backed startup's revenue chart, right? Not what you want to see from the government and its debt obligations.
Yeah.
And so it's unclear how that gets resolved. And like you said, the future is unknown. And, if you're an optimist, great. But I do see some like tough conversations that have to happen over the next 10 years. Because if that continues, we keep borrowing more and more money. And let's be honest, GDP hasn't really gone up to account for all the AI productivity that we're talking about. Well, maybe it will.
Not yet.
It hasn't.
A lot of it is being boosted by capital infusion. But there is this thing in my mind which is hard to quantify, because I feel like I'm so in a bubble in Silicon Valley, just the nature of our work, which is like, is AI becoming a utility? Sam Altman has been talking about this a lot, and say what you want about Sam, but this idea that, we're adding a new dimension to utility, which is your AI consumption. I don't know if I believe it on a tokenized level. I don't know if we'll pay for tokens like we pay for electricity, but I have been paying $200 a month for over a year to Anthropic, because it has changed the way that I work. And there's so many tasks that used to take me 10, 20, 30 an hour that now can be reduced to seconds or minutes. And I will continue paying for it for the rest of my life if that's the case, because I don't want to do that work. And this is just the start. This is just 3 years into, hey.
I think you're right, Austin. But like to bring that into perspective, the same would have been said about calculators. The same was said about mainframes. The same was said about Excel. The same was said about internet. The same was said about mobile. And the same is being said about AI. And the only way and if you scroll back to the GDP growth chart for the last 70 years, it's not like any of those moments had a step function change in the GDP growth rate. They were linear. GDP just continues looking like this, regardless of what's happening around it. So the question is AI a once-in-a-lifetime outlier compared to all the technological advances that have happened? Or is it the same? Yeah. And that's the optimist versus pragmatist bet that people have to make.
Yeah, and it's tough, because I think you and I see both sides of the equation. There's some moments where it performs a task and I'm amazed by what the future can be, and then it turns around and says the dumbest thing in the world, and I'm like, yeah, this is literally just math that's going wrong, right?
Yeah. On that note, we gotta bring it to a close. Oh, man. Austin, it's always fun to do this. The next one is probably going to be an interview with a GTM operator or a founder. I'm actually particularly excited about one of these folks who's doing something fun in the AI space, but he also has a pretty rich background in advertising and MarTech and what have you. So it'll be fun. Until then, enjoy, read some Supertext, and we'll see you in a week or two.
Thanks, Pranav. See ya.